The low-hanging clouds have drifted off. The water has turned into a deep blue-black hue. It's so dark by now that contours don't reveal themselves immediately. And it takes me a while to discern the jagged edges of winding branches, thorny bushes, stones that just fit in the palm of my hand. I rest for a moment, letting the sand slide through my fingers. A grown-up tree trunk to lean against would be convenient, but there is none in sight. At the center of this plot, I notice a different shape. A large flower fanning open, a star with countless points, spikes at its ends. My silent companion. On my back, I fall asleep. When the sun rises, it is not immediately clear what is moving. I lie motionless for a moment to take in the situation. The clouds move, and the ground below me also moves. Okay, sure, why not? The agave next to me has taken years to arrive at this form. The needles may be sharp, the blue-green skin is soft, previous leaves have left their shadow marks. As I sit up and stare across the water, I see that this moving landscape, a floating garden, is not alone. There is a whole group. They seem connected to each other in a slow dance. Strings of thick roots snaking through the water behind them. Each garden has an agave, also commonly known as century plant, in the middle. Sometimes there are 2 or 3. In the distance, I spot one in bloom, its majestic flower stalk still smaller than my little finger. But when hopping and swimming in the right direction, I'm sure I can get close. When to drift along, when to take a leap, when to swim against the current. So the text I have been working on, that I read an excerpt from, is called Shaky Ground, Stubborn Material. And I still don't know exactly what I mean with that. But both these terms or words have been with me for quite a long time. And what I do in my writing is that at some point I just start to write and see where it goes. But I'm not exactly I don't exactly know where I'm going yet. Although slowly this text is more finished by now. But I'm interested in this idea of a shaky ground or unstable ground, because I think in life a lot is actually more unstable than we pretend it to be. And then it's like how to still hold yourself in that and also be with other people. And also what can you find in this shaky ground. And then stubborn material is still a question for me, like what is stubborn material? So I was thinking of more like hard structures that don't have much porosity. Like for instance, the image of pillars in church buildings or in big buildings that seem like they will stay there forever. But are there also other materials that are maybe stubborn in different ways? For instance, stubborn because they refuse to leave, even though they might be unstable or more porous or more fluid or even more messy in themselves. So what we're hearing now is sound of water. I think also the murmur of the city somewhere, general noise, which is never general, footsteps of people passing by, and I think there were some birds also. We are at a bit in the east of Amsterdam, and we are at one of the floating gardens. This garden is made by Ari Taal, and it's part of a series of floating gardens in this area of the city. And they are based on the idea of floating gardens by Robert Jasper Grootveld. I can tell more about him later. But where we are is that we're standing on the street, but right behind us is a kind of construction, a kind of island. We see a big, one or two bigger trees, also some bushes of bamboo behind me. small pots and buckets with flowers, violets, cherry blossom also, small tree, some reed, nettle. It's a whole pretty wild construction, all planted on top of these kind of blocks or floating parts made of styrofoam that are protected by nets. And this is one of these floating gardens, but there are also like two structures on top of it, like small houses. But the strange thing is we cannot really enter. So it looks like there is an entrance over there, but there is a way to get down there, but there's a fence in between. And it also says that it's not allowed to enter. It clearly looks like people have entered because they have to maintain it. And I guess maybe this little house might be in use sometimes by maybe the owner or the people who are maintaining it. So it's a semi-public space. It's more something we can look at than that we can enter. But the reason why I wanted to go here is I just like the idea of a floating garden as a imaginary space or a landscape. So the text that I read before is a short excerpt of a longer text, and it's thinking a little bit about existing systems and structures and maybe dominant structures and how to look for other types of structures. And then I just dreamt of a floating garden. So the part that I read is not an actual floating garden where I've been. It's one that I imagined to be. But then I thought, but actually there are floating gardens in Amsterdam. I heard of them, the drijvende tuinen, we call them in Dutch. It's something that this artist, Robert Jasper Grootveld, like he's an artist who was affiliated with the Provo movement in Amsterdam in the 1960s, who also did kind of performances or rituals or happenings against smoking in the center at the Lievertje statue. But he also called the city Magisch Centrum Amsterdam. So the idea of a magical center, which was really from that time, this counterculture in the 1960s. And later in his life, already in the 50s, apparently he was working on the idea of a floating garden and making like rafters. But only in the late 90s, some of these bigger gardens were realized. He passed away in 2009. But I was also a bit curious about this like remnant or legacy of an artist from that era and the presence of a floating garden in the city as it is now. Because it's a little bit more, I would say, messy and a bit more wild than a lot of the public space we see in the center of Amsterdam. So I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. For me, there's also like a more magical or imaginary side to the idea of a floating garden or calling Amsterdam a magical center. I'm still thinking like, why can it still not be this magical center? So to also take in other things that are maybe not so research or scientific or fact related, but more come from affect or from embodiment or from imagination. So for me, this is also a very poetic gesture in the city. Yeah. It's a bit of a pity we cannot enter the floating garden. So at the moment we have to use mainly our eyes to relate to it, I think. If we would have been able to enter it, I would maybe want to touch some of these plants. I'm just see a bit how they feel or something. And maybe also sit down or lay down on this styrofoam surface and see what it does, to be on the water and be a bit unstable in an environment that always feels very controlled and organized. This area feels a little bit disorganized. So I would just spend some time here, I think, without a clear goal immediately, but take some time to take in the environment, which I think relates to how I work in general. So I often work with space as it is, like what comes up when I'm somewhere. Associations, feelings, questions, but also history. So knowing that this is a garden, partly a follow-up. So Arie Taal made this specific garden with other people, but he learned it from Robert Jasper Grootveld. So there is a kind of lineage, let's say, that I might follow, which is something I would do in general. And then maybe also see what it does today. There is something, I don't want to go too deep into it because I don't know all the details, but I know there have been discussions about these type of floating gardens in Amsterdam because of the styrofoam. There are questions like how should this be maintained? Is there not a risk that some of the styrofoam is getting loose at some point when it's here since the 90s? So that's also... there are the poetics of the gesture, and then there's also the daily reality, and how can we combine the two or live with them. Those things would come up probably. I'm also thinking about access to water in the city. So of course way more people are swimming these days because there are different ways to enter, and then it's really, you're either like in the water or you're on the land. But I think this floating garden sits more in between. But it's also not a boat, so I think you will feel the presence of the water a lot because it's bobbing along a little bit with the water. So it's more like unstable ground. And I think that makes the presence of the water more present or more clear to people. So I think it's a way to more be with the water instead of looking at it from a distance. The fact that it's still here and in full bloom while we are here now in the spring gives me a sign that we might have encountered some stubborn material on shaky ground. But then they have to let us in first. I guess sometimes it is probably open, but I don't know when. That's a bit of the mystery of the... And the mystery is also, I'm totally fine with mysteries in general. Yeah, because then we have to imagine. We cannot solve it immediately. We have to imagine how it would be to be there now.